I want to talk this morning about some aspects of assessment, which I think are absolutely critical from a student's perspective and from a faculty perspective, which I think are often neglected in a lot of module design and certainly in program designs. So essentially, the issue for me is that assessment should really be seen as a program-wide activity. If a student is doing 2 or 3 modules each term or semester, they might do 6, 8 modules in a year, and they might be doing a 3-year degree. So they're going to encounter a lot of different assessment forms, and there has to be some degree of program level planning for those students' encounter with assessment. So assessment is clearly, in my terms, about giving students the opportunity to evidence their ability to meet outcomes rather than demonstrate what they know, right? So it's about what they can do as a result of the teaching encounters that they've experienced. And programming that at a program level makes a huge difference to the student experience. The idea, and it certainly was my experience as an undergraduate some years ago, that all of the assessments were due on the final day of the semester, right? So you do 3 modules and you're expected to submit 3 long essays or sit an exam in the final week, or whatever the assessment form is. It tends to come at the very end of a particular module, and all of the modules end at the same time, and everything is designed at a modular level. And so as a result, the burden on students is huge. Now, there may be some circumstances, depending on the nature of the program, that putting students under that kind of pressure is entirely appropriate. If you're doing policy studies and people are training to become government policy advisors, they're going to be working under huge pressure to generate their policy recommendations, very often with 24, 48 hours. If you're teaching journalism, likewise, you're hitting a deadline. But certainly for a lot of disciplines, that assessment pressure is not designed as proof of a real-world experience. It's just an accident of planning or administration constraints. And I think we really need to be very honest as course designers as to why we design and program assessment the way we do. So I think program directors and program developers, program designers, have a very important role in scheduling assessment across modules. That's number one. So programming is incredibly important. The second issue, which I've already alluded to, is that assessment really is about assessing the outcomes. If it is designed to assess outcomes rather than some notional content, then it makes it much more flexible. It doesn't restrict the way that you design your assessment. Quite the contrary. It allows you to anticipate what year-on-year modifications will be required. You might cycle through a series of different assessment forms or assessment questions or assessment approaches in order to, A, reduce any danger of plagiarism, but also to make sure that the assessment is entirely authentic. If your assessment is always a single longhand question or 3 short answer questions in an exam situation, there comes a limit point at which you're limiting your own ability to be creative about changing the questions year on year on year. So having some flexibility in the design is extremely important. If you are assessing the outcomes where you're focusing on the skills, because skills can be manifested in a variety of different forms. You may even find it much easier then to provide alternative assessments, both for those that have a learning difficulty issue or indeed for any repeat resubmissions and so on. So that's a fine art, and I run some workshops to support people to do that, and there's resources available online. The third issue, I think, from an assessment perspective, is the in-course or the in-module scheduling of assessment. And I've alluded to this in other videos. There is nothing to say that all summative assessment has to occur at the end of a module. It may be that students are demonstrating some outcomes much earlier than the end of a particular module, and so you can have credit-bearing assessment weighted accordingly at some point during a module. Don't have to leave everything to the very end. So those are just some idle thoughts this morning on some assessment forms, largely in response to some recent reports that have emerged in the UK about students' frustration around assessment. And one of the accusations is that it puts an unnecessary burden on faculty. That's a very important factor, and I'll deal with that in an alternative video.